All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. You ready?
Okay, ready.
All right, let me adjusting here. And all right, so 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Aimie Apigian. Aimie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Guy. I'm really excited for this topic and this conversation today.
All right, thank you. So Aimie is a board-certified preventive medicine physician with a master's in biochemistry and a master's in public health. She is an author, speaker, and founder of Trauma Healing Accelerated and Family Challenge Camps, and she's also host of the Bio-Optimized Summit. After a few years in general surgery residency in Portland, Oregon, she decided to forge her career path as a trauma, attachment, and addiction medicine physician. Aimie believes the healing journey can be accelerated through evidence-based tools and approaches to rewire the nervous system and the effects of chronic stress and trauma on the mind and body. Having both parented children with effects from attachment and trauma issues, and then having her own health challenges from chronic stress and traumas, she's intensely invested on finding what actually works practically on how to restore the body to its highest potential for health, optimizing the biology. Awesome. Aimie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really excited to dive into trauma, biology, and all of that stuff.
Awesome. All right. So before we go in here, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I grew up in Washington State, so I was actually born in a small city called Omak, which is not far from the Canadian border over on the Middle Eastern side of Washington State. So spent all of my childhood there in Washington, loved the Northwest, was very active, and we grew up, I grew up in a place where there was mountains and rivers. And so we were always outdoors doing something.
Nice.
And my trainings have taken me to Southern California. So that's where I'm at the moment. Okay. And also have a place in Mexico that I've been building, a retreat center to hold intensives and workshops. Oh. And so I split my time between there and here now.
Awesome. All right. So let's hear about your journey, your story. I guess first into your interest in becoming a physician, and then specifically into trauma and attachment and so forth.
Well, you know, the more we go along in life, Guy, the more we kind of understand more about ourselves and why we maybe chose the path that we did. So as I've been doing even more of my own attachment and personal work, I realized that, I had some gaps in certain stages of neurodevelopment and attachment. And that led me to seeking a profession where I would be very much, I would be worthy by being able to be useful to people. And so I definitely chose a career in which I could say, like, I help people. I'm a physician and have a sense of worth because of that. So
you thought of that before you decided to become a physician?
No. Oh. This is all just, in the last just few years as I've, cause I continue doing my own work,
right.
And peeling back the next layer and then the next layer. And so that's been one of the latest layers that I've peeled back, is like, that was, now that I understand more of my gaps in early life, I understand now the connection.
Got it. Okay.
Not feeling worthy in that sense. And so I need to be able to do something.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
To be able to be worthy. Yeah.
Okay. So on a different level, a more surface level, what was the pull when you were younger to become a physician?
Science. Like, I am just a nerd and I am a geek. Like, I love learning and understanding things that have been complex, and the body is one of those things. And so I remember falling in love with DNA and genetics. And it was like, this is me. Like, I want to go deeper into this. And so,
Right.
yeah, the pull of understanding things really drew me in back at that time. And that's why I even went on to get a master's in biochemistry. At one point, I was even thinking of doing a PhD in biochemistry along with medical school. Cause yeah, like I am still your science nerd at the core.
There you go. So, all right, you get into medical school, you do your residency, and talk about your the evolution of working with people, and then moving into working with trauma and attachment and so forth.
So I started foster parenting when I was in medical school. And that is what really started me even interested in trauma. I would say that growing up earlier, I was probably always drawn to kids who I perceived were hurting, but never really had the means to be able to do anything until I was in medical school. And then I had a little open space, and I'm like, I'll become a foster parent for this moment in time. And then that led to this, and then that led to this, and then that led to this. So I never saw myself going into trauma. I never even saw myself going into psychiatry, which is kind of, if you're in the medical field, like that's where you would go. And so I am not a psychiatrist. I completed medical school. By then I had adopted my son that they had placed with me as a foster child.
Did you do that as a single parent?
I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
In medical school?
In medical school.
Okay.
Amazing.
Yeah. I mean, come on. And crazy.
Yeah. Crazy and amazing, guy.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Both.
Yeah.
And I'm, looking back now, I wouldn't have had it any other way. I would say that it took me to my lowest low for sure. It led me to a low that I still have not ever gone lower than that, of trying to figure out how to help Miguel overcome his past when everything that I thought would work was not working at all. And he was continuing to get further into his emotional and behavioral issues. And I had thrown everything at it that I knew to do, and it wasn't working. So as a mom and as a physician, right? Like I'm trained to fix things, and this is not working. And so it changed my life ultimately.
Well, let me, if I can pause you, because this is really interesting to me. So my guess is when you're fostering and so forth, they let you know that a lot of kids, most kids who are fostered have issues,
yes,
come from particular backgrounds, which they may or may not know the specifics of, right? To what degree were you informed? Did you know what happened to your son?
I knew quite a bit, and I knew that he had emotional and behavioral issues. That's why they were excited to place him with me, is because he didn't do well with other kids. And I didn't have any other kids. And so they felt that would be a help to him. And certainly with him and with many other foster children or even adopted children, they have the initial honeymoon period. And then, right, like the things get real, because their issues, their triggers, their fears, all of that comes out. They can only hide that for so long. And certainly what I had to learn was that time does not heal. And I thought that it would, and I was told that it would, right? I was told that time and love was all that this kid needed. And I got to learn that that's not true. And so that's where I started stumbling then on, well, it's biology, right? Like there were actually biology factors in his body that were keeping him stuck. But I didn't know that at the time. I literally did think that my love, I just needed to love him enough for him to know that he was loved, know that he was safe, know that he had a family, know that I was now going to be his forever mom. And that just with the right time, right? Time and love. And that's what people need. Right. And I still see that being spoken a lot, even with adults, right? It's like, oh, just give it some time. And it's like, no, no, actually, no. If we're not, if we're not applying the right tools and actually causing a different pattern in our nervous system, time is just further ingraining that pattern into our biology. So I knew a lot of his past. I asked for it. So I had all the records. I knew that he had many different placements. And when we're talking about even just how they place, kids in a temporary home until the real home opens up, right? Like counting all of those, he had been through more than 20 placements by the time he arrived at my home at
what age?
4.
Wow.
4.
Holy
Yeah.
crap.
Yeah. Right. And then you add on to that his in utero experience, right? His mom was a teenage mom. This was actually her second child. She had already had to adopt out, I think, through the foster care system, her first child. So she was in a very unsettled place in her life on substances. We're not sure how much of that she used while she was pregnant, but we can assume that there was some. And then his early life experience, right? Like he actually did spend 9 months with her and her mother. She had actually been a foster child herself. So we're back in the environment that the state had deemed unsafe for her when she was a child. And now he's in the same environment. And so there was a lot of stuff. And I had so much compassion for him, Guy, which is why I literally thought like I could not love him any more than how much I loved him. And I knew that the power of my love, the consistency of my love would change him. And what I failed to know about trauma yet was that it was that love that scared him the most. Mm-hmm. And that's what he was pushing away. That's what was triggering him. That's what was keeping him from opening up. He felt much safer when there was no emotion, when it was just hey, we're coexisting in this house. I'm not your mom. You're not my son. This is just the rules. This is the way it is. And we're going to, get through that. He would have much preferred that than to have this thing of, oh, you're my mom. And you love me. And wow, like this brings up so much stuff because of everything in his body that was like reacting to any mother figure.
So when you say the love that you were giving him, showing him, be more specific. And you said the emotion. So hugging, saying, "Oh, I love you." What?
Well, it started with me preparing just for his stay with a ton of gifts. So I bought all kinds of toys. I made this incredible room for him. Like I went, I don't want to say over the top because I'm sure that there are other people who have done more than me, but I wanted him to know that he was wanted.
Yeah.
I wanted him to know that I wanted him there and that I saw him as special and that he wasn't just, one more kid and just one more. No, like I created the environment in which he would know and see and experience in practical ways that he was loved, he was wanted. So the toys and the room, everything. And another thing that I did was that I spent a lot of time with him, just playing, right? And then on top of that, there was the food and there was, just the nurture, right? I grew up having a Mexican mom come into my life when I was about 9 years old. And so like, I just kind of took what she did for me of just pouring all this nurture and love and hugs and food and just like, what else can I do for you? And kind of channeled that and gave that to him. And that's, that was part of what was his trigger.
Wow. So how do things progress such that, or when you begin to see and learn, wait a minute, this actually is not what this kid needs? How did you realize that?
Yeah, well, let me take you to a moment in time when I'm actually holding him and we're rocking. And so he's on my lap and I've got food because I'm doing some attachment parenting now. So I'm actually giving him like little treats, little candies, caramels in order to, help him tolerate my love, if you want to say it that way. It's like, I will bribe you with candy in order to sit on my lap and to let
Something
me tell
most
you how much
parents
I love
probably
you.
have done.
I don't know how many parents, have had that experience. You have to bribe your kid in
Right.
order just to be able to tell them that you love them.
Yeah.
And for them to take it in and even have eye contact with me. Right. That was something that was really scary. He would only make eye contact with me long enough for me to be, okay, I'll put a little piece of candy in your mouth. And then his eyes were everywhere else. And there was a lot more that was going on in terms of his body just rejecting me. He would pee on me. So whenever I would have him sit next to me or on my lap, he would pee on me. So in this moment, though, what happened was that he actually was calmly talking to me. We were having a very, what I thought was going to be a very ordinary conversation between us of, hey, what's going on? What's your favorite toy? And, what's this? And what are you looking forward to for tonight? On, conversation, any conversation that I could have with him. And then he just kind of said it. And he was like, Mom, tomorrow I'm going to kill you.
How old is he at this point?
He was 6 at this point.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And he said, not today, Mom, not today, tomorrow. And so I am trying to not let my inner twisting of my gut show on my face, right? Like, I know that I'm just supposed to stay calm, right? Like, I'm not supposed to cause him to, react or notice that I'm getting upset. So I'm trying to fake it, right? I'm not sure how good I was in that moment. Because I didn't know what to do, right? But for me, Guy, like, what a low moment for me, where it's like I'm holding him in my arms and I've got so much love for him. I've worked on having my eyes be able to express that softness and that acceptance and that unconditional love, even if you're peeing on me. And this is where we're at. And then he proceeded to tell me, tomorrow, I'm going to take a stick and poke your eyes out. But tomorrow, Mom, not today. And so that was when I knew, like, I've got to do something different. Like, what I've been doing, I'm now ready to check that box of I've tried that and it hasn't worked. So that was my moment of, all right, like, I'm going to start searching for other tools, for other ways, for other understanding. I now felt like I had a pretty good understanding of why he was doing what he was doing, but it hadn't given me the tools to be able to change that yet. And that's what I wanted for him, because as a mom, are you a parent, Guy?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I have a 6-year-old and a 13-year-old.
Yeah. Awesome. So as a parent, like, what you most want for your kids is just for them to be happy, right? Like, yeah, success and whatever, sure, whatever. But at the core of what we want for our kids is just for them to be happy. And some of the happiest moments for us as parents is being able to watch them when they don't know that we're watching them even, right? And they're just laughing and they're happy and they're at their best. And it's like, oh, like, that's what I wanted for him. And I had never even seen that. His laugh was a very fake, superficial laugh. It wasn't a real laugh. It wasn't a real laugh. And you could tell in his body, just in how his posture was braced, and he'd walk around very much kind of almost like always ready to fight. Right. And it was like, kid, you're not happy. Right. Like, when you're fighting, when you're trying to fight for control and you're trying to fight to reject me and tell me that I will never be your mom, like, you're not happy. And I truly, truly just want to see you happy. And so for me, that was my motivation, Guy, to move mountains and cross seas and do anything that I needed in order to figure out how to shift that for him, how to take what I understood was happening, and it's understandable, but I didn't want that to be the rest of his life, because I saw a pretty bleak future for him if he continued to just push people away and reject them.
So what did you do? How did you search? What did you search?
I started searching for anything that seemed to be working. And so I started going to different people, different modalities, if I saw that it was helping other families.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately our path, I mean, it took us 4 more years after that to figure out all the
Wow.
pieces for him. Yeah, it was I think a long journey. And I say long, Guy, because I would have wanted, like this is where, right, like the kind of like the sadness for me comes up, is I would have wanted to know what I know now back then, so that I could have helped him go through his journey much faster. If I had known what I know now about the biology piece and about the different body types of work that we can do and how trauma is stored in the body, and the biology that will keep a person stuck, and probably the biology that actually led him to be this reactive and experience this much trauma, and be able to start bringing in some specific support for his biology in that way, I know that I could have shortened that journey and gotten him to a place of happiness much sooner in his childhood. And I felt like I was racing against the clock, because I so wanted him to have some elements of his childhood where he could look back and say, those were happy times. I was happy then. I didn't want him to get through all of childhood and have to look back and see like it was all bleak. It was all dark. I was never happy. So racing against the clock, it was my all consuming drive outside of my own studies and medical work. Because of course I'm still in medical school. I've graduated. I've gone into general surgery residency.
Okay.
And so I'm managing that, and everything else is going towards him and figuring out what's the next piece. Oh, we brought in this piece and it helped a little bit. Okay.
What, for example, what piece did you bring in that helped a little bit?
Diet.
Okay.
Diet was huge.
Diet was huge.
Yes. And so that is something that I have had to learn. I very briefly, and I'm actually doing a whole masterclass on it later today, I thought that I knew what was the most healthy diet for everybody on the face of the earth. And what I've come to find is that actually when a person is either in a stress response or actually in the freeze or trauma response, there are very different dietary nutritional needs that the body has. And so when we can understand that, oh, you're actively in a stress response, or you're actively you're already in your trauma place, there are specific things that we can change in your diet to help support that. Because, with everything that we know about trauma and how it affects the vagus nerve and how it affects the sympathetic nervous system and what those do to your digestive system, it's huge. And yet, we try to eat the same, or we try to eat comfort foods because they help us feel better in the moment, but then they end up being very inflammatory. And so for any parents who know about like brain inflammation and all the brain inflammation that we can get from our food, so much of these types of emotions and behavioral, very extreme reactions are always involving inflammation in the biology. And so if I am having him eat a diet that's continuing to perpetuate that inflammation, I'm working against myself, because his nervous system will never be able to shift to a place of security and safety while it's in this bath of inflammation.
I want to get to the founding of Trauma Healing Accelerated, and then talk about family challenge camps. But before we do, so give us just a little example of what he was eating, and then when you switched to what?
Yeah. So at the time I was eating a vegan diet. And again, based on my training, Guy, this is my medical training. I knew, I didn't even second guess it. I knew that was the best diet, hands down, for everybody on the face of the earth. And there's lots of studies to support that. So there are lots of studies showing the benefit of a vegan diet. And what I have had to discover is that there's actually different types of biochemistry. And one quick example that I'll kind of throw your way is undermethylators. Myself and Miguel were undermethylators. And so there are higher protein needs for undermethylators. Undermethylators tend to have lower dopamine activity and also lower serotonin activity. They need higher protein levels in order to be able to be making those neurotransmitters that are essential for our sense of happiness and our sense of bonding and attachment, by the way. And so not knowing that back then, right? Like the understanding that I had from the training and all of the studies that I had been shown was that a person actually didn't need that much protein, and actually that higher protein was bad for you. And so that was one thing that I did wrong, certainly. And so here he is in this high stress response. I certainly was in a really high stress response, living with this and not knowing what else to do, and eating a diet that was not sustaining, not giving us the nutrients that we needed to maintain that stress response. And when we do that, then it ends up going more into the trauma response or that freeze response, because it overwhelms on a cellular level our system. But then also breads. So breads actually have the ingredients in breads, and specifically gluten, actually binds our opiate receptors. And so that's why breads are oftentimes, or grains, I should say, are oftentimes our comfort food, is because it actually binds our opiate receptors and numbs the emotional pain. That's what opiates do. So opiates are pain pills, right? So we've got whatever type of pain you have, physical pain, emotional pain, the opiate system in our body is our way of numbing that. Interestingly enough, like that's actually part of our freeze response, is this release of endorphins that numbs pain. And so if you were a deer and you're being chased by a cheetah, and you go into that freeze response, that's thankfully part of what that freeze response is, so that you don't feel the pain then of when you're bitten. But as humans, that's what we experience. And so it's so normal and natural, I would say, to go to comfort foods. And yet it's also blocking our ability to be in our body, to feel our emotions, and to be able to work through them, because it just numbs them. So then we also can look at inflammatory foods, food sensitivities, and the inflammation that causes, and all kinds of stuff in the digestive system. And all of that, Guy, it travels up the vagus nerve from your gut to your brain. That vagus nerve is that connection, and inflammation in the gut from foods that we're eating that we're having any kind of an immune reaction to, it actually travels up the vagus nerve and is causing brain inflammation, which will certainly make all of us more emotional, and so more reactive, more sensitive, more labile. And so certainly for someone like Miguel, who has that history, it just fuels the fire. And it becomes a fire that's too big to put out with just your normal traditional therapy methods. Because of course I was doing all of that.
Wow. Fascinating. I mean,
it's fascinating. Like it's so, and this is where like I start to get geeky and nerdy with my science stuff, Guy.
Well, I mean, we could do a whole episode on this. So when do you start thinking to yourself, I want to found this organization, this company, Trauma Healing Accelerated?
That actually came after my own health crash. And so out of the work with my son, I founded Family Challenge Camps, and I started working with other families. But then there came a time when I had a complete health crash, and here I had always been very active. I told you that was from my very beginning, right? And so by this time in my life, like I'm in my early 30s, and I had run 5 marathons. I am still a very avid biker. And so to go into this chronic fatigue, which is where I went, and literally, Guy, could not get out of bed. It felt I had to sleep 2 hours just to be able to walk down the stairs and grab something in the kitchen to eat.
Okay, wait, contextualize this a little bit. So you're out of school at this point.
I know, I am in the middle of surgery residency when my health crash happened.
Okay.
Yes.
So how did it come about?
Well, I would love to say that I noticed it happen. I noticed it coming, but I was so busy. I was so caught up with my son and my surgery residency. And it just never was an option to slow down. It just was not an option on the table. And so I went until I crashed. And one day what happened is that I was actually on transplant surgery rotation. And for those people who know anything about transplant surgery, you don't know when a transplant is going to come in, right? And so you are up all day, you are up all night. There were some days on that rotation when I was up for 36 hours straight because we had 2 kidneys come in and they have to be transplanted then. And so it pushed my system that was already struggling. It just took it to the edge. And so what happened is that there was one night in particular where I got a phone call from the ICU. I got a page and I'm supposed to call them back. And I woke up with my phone in my hand and I had not been able to stay awake long enough to call them back.
Oh man.
So that was my crash. And from there, like it went into a very dark place. Cause of course, being my sense of worth, right. Being around what I do. And now I can't do that. Like I literally can't even stay awake. The fatigue hit me that hard. And I then went in, of course, I got checked out, had labs drawn, and we found a couple different things. And one of the things that we found, Guy, was that my autoimmune markers were high. I had no idea. I had never felt like I had any symptoms of it, but they also told me that they weren't going to diagnose me just based off of markers, but it was a wake-up call for me. Because from my medical training, I knew that high autoimmune markers, that autoimmunity was so closely associated with childhood stress and adverse childhood events, right? We have the study, we have the adverse childhood experiences study to show that. And I'm sitting there scratching my head, Guy, because I'm like, this isn't me. Like, I didn't come from a family of trauma. Like that's Miguel. That's not me.
Right.
And so for me to see, wait a second, there's something else going on here, because if I can have autoimmunity and I can have all of these issues that I know, even the chronic fatigue, right, is strongly associated with adverse childhood experiences. If I can develop all of these symptoms and not really have a high ACE score, then it's not really about the ACE score. There's something that's happening in childhood that I share in common with my son that I need to go figure out. And so then I started working on myself, my own system, and figuring out, oh yeah, like it actually has nothing to do with the events in childhood. It all has to do with the dysregulation of your nervous system, the experiences, your felt experiences, and how your nervous system adapted. That's what's important. And so from there, I had to figure things out for myself. I knew that I did not want that to be the rest of my life. And so I had to now figure out the pieces of how do I rewire my nervous system for a sense of security and safety as an adult. I have figured out how to do it in kids, which is incredible and so cool. And I love that. But now I'm faced with having to do it as an adult. And it was out of my experience then that I founded Trauma Healing Accelerated, because I started to see in all of my patients, Guy, right? Like this is us as adults. Like we're still carrying our past with us, whether we recognize it or not. And it's driving our health, our physical health. It's still driving our emotional health. It's still driving our decisions, even our decisions about what we do for a career and being an entrepreneur. And does it feel safe to be seen? Does it feel safe to put myself out there? If you've got these things from your childhood that informs you differently, that is going to hold you back. And so it was like, all right, like this is the new level to my work, is helping adults rewire their stored trauma in their body through and accelerating that healing journey so that they're not in therapy forever, by bringing in this biology piece that I have found essential.
What an intense, incredible story that is.
Wow.
I mean, just from your son and everything, and to this realization with yourself. And so are you seeing patients at this time currently now?
Yeah, good question. So I left surgery residency actually. And that's when I changed and decided, you know what, I'm going to create this career for myself in trauma, attachment, and addictions. I don't see any other medical physician leaning into trauma, but that's not going to stop me, because I now see like this is what I want to help other people do as well. But knowing that there wasn't, there isn't a field of trauma for medicine, there is maybe for psychiatry, but not for medicine, then I wanted to go into addiction medicine. And so I've been actually doing most of my in-person work with addictions and running detox units where I'm detoxing people off of alcohol, substances, all of that. It's been very rewarding, Guy. And I just love it because, again, like I'm working right there with trauma, right? Like I'm working with a dysregulated nervous system and helping them kind of get off their coping mechanisms that they've been using for their dysregulation. But recently what's happened is that this biology of trauma methodology has just exploded, and now we're kind of all over the world, and I'm training practitioners all over the world. So I've left that practice, and now all of my work is online, providing education and then experiential programs. And so I run an annual Biology of Trauma Summit for the educational piece, and then I invite people to like, okay, let's get real and let's actually change these patterns. And so I run my experiential courses and also have all of that included by addressing the biology with my team of health coaches, so that again, like we're just working with all of the things and modalities that I found necessary for myself and also for Miguel.
So who is the trauma healing program or trauma healing accelerated for?
Yeah. So right now we've got parents who will come in and they are working on their own stuff, but then also kind of taking that back to their relationship with their child. We've got adults who are working on rewiring themselves. And then what I've done over the last year is I've started a training program, a certification program for practitioners. And I use that term very loosely because it really is any professional in a helping profession. And so if you're working with people, you're working with trauma, and being able to have a different lens from what we've been taught, where it's really, we've focused on the mind, we've focused on the cognitive side, the psychology side of trauma. And I want people to be able to see the biology side so that they can be bringing in that piece for their clients. So a lot of practitioners, and then a lot of people who are doing this work for themselves, and they don't want to wait for the practitioners to get trained. They want this information now. So they're going through these experiential and educational programs.
Awesome. All right, Aimie, what's the best way for people to contact you?
Yeah, the best way would be to hop over to our website, traumahealingaccelerated.com, and there you'll see our programs. You'll see where you want to jump in and get started with things. And then there's also contact form for if you have any questions. That's the best place to reach us.
Awesome. Aimie, look, incredible. I mean, so friggin' inspiring you are. My God. Thank you so much for coming on here. I'd love to have you back at a later time. And, but really, thank you for sharing your story with your son and just giving us the gift of your openness and vulnerability. I mean, that's what this podcast is about. I appreciate it.
I was going to say right back at you, Guy. Thank you for what you're doing in the world and what you're bringing in and how you're showing up in the world for us.
I appreciate that. All right. Be well. Take care. Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.